The drill was silent for 4 seconds before Commander Brett Harlan spoke. And those 4 seconds told everyone on the training field exactly what was about to happen. Ghost had broken position again. The German Shepherd was sitting at the center of the obstacle course at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, ears flat, body low, eyes fixed on nothing that anyone else could see. Not the decoy handler across the field, not the training sergeant, not the target dummy at the far end of the run. He had not moved in 90 seconds. 90 seconds was not a pause in a combat drill. 90 seconds was a failure. Commander Harlan set down his clipboard. Again, he said. Ghost did not move. Harlan looked at the training sergeant. The sergeant looked at the leash. The leash ran from the sergeant's hand to the dog's collar, and it might as well have run to a different planet. Because Ghost was somewhere else entirely, somewhere unreachable by command or correction, and the 22 men watching from the edge of the field had gone very quiet in the particular way of people witnessing something they cannot explain and do not want to be blamed for. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hayes stood at the perimeter of that field and watched the dog, and he already knew. He had known for 11 days. What he did not know yet was how far he would have to go to be heard, or what an off-duty Thursday morning at a diner on Orange Avenue was about to change. Before we go further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and stay until the very end. What a diner waitress said to a broken military working dog, and what it cost one Navy commander when the truth came out, is a story that will stay with you. We read every single comment, and we want to know how far this travels. Ethan Hayes was 41 years old, and he had the particular leanness of someone who had never stopped moving long enough to put weight back on after losing it in hard places. He was 6 feet tall and 187 pounds, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set that way on purpose. Square, fixed. Not aggressive, but absolute. The jaw of someone who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up. His eyes were pale gray-green, the color of the Pacific on an overcast morning, and they moved through any room the way a sonar sweep moves through water. Complete, methodical, missing nothing, giving away as little as possible. There was a thin scar along the outside of his right forearm from a piece of copper wire during a fast rope entry in Helmand Province that had opened him to the bone and been stitched in a forward operating base by a corpsman who had used 11 sutures and approximately 4 seconds of anesthesia. Ethan had not complained at the time and did not think about it now. He was not a man who spoke unnecessarily. He was not a man who performed, not his rank, not his record, not his opinions. He carried himself with the unhurried authority of someone who has spent enough time in genuine danger that civilian friction no longer registers as a threat worth responding to. His men trusted him the way men trust someone who has been in front of them when it mattered, and that trust was not given lightly, and had not been given quickly, and Ethan had never once confused it with admiration, because he understood the difference. He had served 14 years with Naval Special Warfare Command, 2 years at SEAL Team 5, and 12 with SEAL Team 6, completing 5 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, and 1 to Yemen that did not appear on the publicly accessible portion of his record. He carried a Silver Star from Kunar Province in 2014, a Bronze Star with Valor from Ramadi in 2016, and a Navy Commendation Medal that he considered the least interesting thing about his career. He had not sought a single one of them. He had sought to bring his men home, and the record of his success in that was sufficient. He was currently assigned to Novspec Warcom's Advanced K-9 Integration Program at Coronado, a role designed to improve the working relationship between SEAL operators and military working dogs during high-risk direct action missions. And he was in that role because he was the best qualified person available for it. And because he genuinely believed that the K-9 units were the most undervalued asset in the special operations community, and because until 11 days ago he had believed that the program was working. Ghost was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, 87 pounds, with a coat of deep charcoal and silver that ran thicker along his back and neck, giving him in low light the quality of something that moved through shadows rather than across them. He was a military working dog certified in patrol, tracking, and explosive ordnance detection. A dog who had completed 2 operational deployments, both to Kandahar province, both with distinction, and who bore on his left rear leg a long diagonal scar from a fragmentation wound sustained during a compound clearance in 2022 that had required surgery and 6 weeks of rehabilitation, and from which he had recovered completely, or so his files said. Ghost moved when he was right, with a kind of controlled urgency that even experienced handlers described as something beyond training, an animal intelligence so finely calibrated to threat detection that working alongside him felt, as one handler had written in an after-action report, like working with someone who already knew the answer and was waiting patiently for you to ask the right question. But Ghost was not right. He had not been right since Commander Brett Harlan had taken over the program 8 weeks ago and reassigned the dog's primary handler. Ethan had requested a meeting with Harlan on the morning of day 3. Harlan had kept him waiting 40 minutes and then given him 11. On day 7, Ethan had submitted a formal written recommendation that Ghost's handler reassignment be reviewed. On day 9, the recommendation had come back denied with a single line of response. Operational decisions within the program are at the discretion of the program commander. On day 11, Ethan had stood at the perimeter of the training field and watched Ghost sit motionless in the middle of a combat drill for 90 seconds, while Harlan set down his clipboard. Commander Brett Harlan was 47 years old and had been at Coronado for 3 years, during which time he had accomplished the particular kind of career management that prioritizes the appearance of results over the reality of them. He was compact and blonde going gray, with the polished look of someone who attended the right meetings in the right uniform and had learned that advancement in the institutional military, at a certain level, was as much about political navigation as operational excellence. He had not deployed to a combat zone in 6 years. He had not personally worked with a military working dog in longer. He ran the K-9 integration program because it was a high-visibility assignment that reported directly to a rear admiral he played golf with, and because the program's success metrics were defined in ways that he had quietly ensured rewarded administrative efficiency over field performance. The men under him did not trust him. They had learned not to say so. His decision to reassign Ghost's handler had been made for reasons that had nothing to do with Ghost and everything to do with the handler Harlan had removed. A chief petty officer named Marcus Webb, who had worked with Ghost for 2 years, who had been on both of Ghost's operational deployments, and who had made the institutional mistake 6 months prior of writing a performance evaluation that disagreed with one of Harlan's assessments in direct terms. Harlan had not punished Webb overtly. He had simply reassigned Ghost to a newer handler, a second-class petty officer who was capable and willing, but who Ghost had never worked with and would not work with now, and whose increasing frustration with the dog was visible and daily and going nowhere. Harlan had told the training staff that Ghost needed recalibration. He had told his admiral that the program was ahead of schedule. Neither of these things was true. What Harlan had not accounted for was Ethan Hayes, who was not a man who submitted recommendations and then waited quietly to see what happened. The diner on Orange Avenue was called Pendleton's, and it had been there since 1971 and smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the particular warmth of a room that has been kept at the same temperature by the same equipment for decades. The booths were red vinyl, patched in 3 places with electrical tape that had been there long enough to become part of the decor. The ceiling fans turned slowly and accomplished nothing. The counter stools were chrome and wobbled in a way that the owner had explained, when asked, that he had no interest in fixing because the people who sat on them long enough to notice the wobble were the people he wanted coming back. A handwritten sign near the register offered a veteran's discount every day of the week, not just on holidays. The coffee came in mugs, not cups, and it was refilled without being asked. Ethan went there on Thursday mornings because it was 3 blocks from his apartment, and because the coffee was strong, and because nobody there asked him about work. He had brought Ghost that morning, permitted under the base's service animal access policy, which Ghost technically qualified for, because the dog needed to be somewhere other than the kennels, somewhere that smelled like the world rather than like institution, and because Ethan needed to think, and he had long since learned that he thought more clearly when Ghost was beside him. The dog had walked into the diner without hesitation, moved straight to the corner booth as though he had been there before, and lain down flat beneath the table without a command. That, too, was something Ethan had noticed. Ghost had stopped needing commands for things he already understood. He had simply stopped responding to commands he didn't trust. Her name was Nora Finch. She was 63 years old. With silver hair she wore pulled back without ceremony, and the particular efficiency of movement that belongs to people who have been on their feet for decades and have learned to take the straightest line between any 2 points in a room. She had worked at Pendleton's for 19 years. She set down Ethan's coffee without being asked. He was a regular. She knew his order. And then she looked under the table at Ghost. Ghost had not moved when she approached. He had not raised his head. He simply lay there in the particular flatness of a dog that has stopped expecting much from the world it is currently occupying. Nora Finch looked at the dog for a moment. Then she lowered herself carefully to one knee beside the booth, the kind of lowering that acknowledges an aching joint without dramatizing it, and she said one word to Ghost in a tone so plain and so certain that it carried no performance whatsoever. "Come," she said. Ghost lifted his head. He looked at her for a full second. His ears came forward. Then he rose from beneath the table and moved to her, and she put one hand flat against the side of his neck, not patting, not rubbing, simply placing her hand there with the calm certainty of someone who has never been afraid of animals and never needed to announce it. And Ghost pressed back into her palm, and his tail moved once, slowly, and then again. Ethan had not moved. He was watching the dog with the focused attention of a man who has just seen something that changes the calculation entirely. Nora looked up at him. "He's been told to be quiet for too long," she said. It was not a question. Ethan said nothing for a moment. "What do you mean?" She stood back up with the same careful practicality she had come down with. "That's a working dog," she said. "You can see it in everything about him, the way he came in, the way he scanned the room, the way he's lying. Everything about him is working. But somebody's been telling him it doesn't matter." She looked at Ghost once more, and her expression was not pitying. It was accurate, the way a diagnosis is accurate. Somebody stopped listening to him. So he stopped talking. She picked up the coffee pot and went back to the counter without waiting for a response, because 19 years behind a diner counter had taught her that the people who most needed to hear something were frequently the last to know what to say after hearing it, and that this was fine, and that the thing to do was give them space and let it settle. Ethan sat in the corner booth of Pendleton's diner for a long moment and looked at Ghost. Ghost was standing beside the table, not lying flat. Standing, with his ears forward and his head slightly raised, and his eyes fixed on Ethan's face with an attention so specific and so complete that it felt less like a dog watching a person and more like a partner, waiting to see if the other partner had finally understood the situation. He had. Something in that posture, the patience of it, the precision of it, was not the trained readiness of a working dog on a drill. It was something older than training and quieter than performance. It was the posture of a dog that had been still long enough and had decided, based on evidence it had assembled without anyone's help, that the person across from it was worth trying again. Ethan put his phone in his pocket. He had a call to make. Not to Harlan. Harlan's chain of command went up, but so did Ethan's, and they did not converge at the same place. He had spent 14 years in an environment where the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one frequently came down to whether the right person received the right information before it was too late to act on it. He understood chain of command completely. He understood which links in it could be trusted and which links had been compromised. And he understood that confusing the two was the most dangerous mistake a person in his position could make. He had served 14 years in the special operations community. He knew a rear admiral who was not the one Harlan played golf with. He also knew a JAG officer who had spent 4 years prosecuting personnel misconduct cases and who answered his personal cell before 7 in the morning, which was a habit that had proven useful before. He left money on the table. He looked at the counter, where Nora Finch was already filling someone else's cup without looking up. "Thank you," he said. She did not look up. "Take care of your dog," she said. He already was. The call Ethan made from the parking lot of Pendleton's Diner lasted 22 minutes. The call that followed it lasted 9. By noon that day, a formal inquiry had been opened through the Inspector General's office at Novspec Workom into the reassignment of Ghost's primary handler and the program documentation practices of Commander Brett Harlan. By 3 that afternoon, a lieutenant from the IG office had arrived at Coronado and requested access to the K-9 program's evaluation files for the preceding 8 weeks. Harlan had been informed. His response, delivered to the IG lieutenant through his adjutant, was that the evaluation files were in order and that any inquiry would confirm the program was performing at standard. He had sounded, his adjutant later said, completely certain. He should not have sounded certain. The evaluation files were not in order. What the IG investigation found over the following 3 weeks was a systematic pattern of documentation manipulation in which Ghost's declining performance metrics had been reclassified, retimed, and in 2 instances simply omitted from the weekly performance reports submitted to the Rear Admiral's office. The program had not been ahead of schedule. The program had been failing, and the failure had been hidden, and the hiding had been deliberate. Ghost knew. He had been performing these assessments. He had been producing the results Harlan had not reported, and the handler Harlan had installed, young, willing, blameless, had been placed in an impossible position without ever being told what the position actually was. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb was returned to his role as Ghost's primary handler on a Tuesday morning, 4 weeks after the diner on Orange Avenue. Webb walked onto the training field and said nothing to Ghost, because nothing needed to be said. Ghost walked directly to Webb's left side, pressed close, and looked up at him with the particular focused attention that his file described as operational readiness, and that anyone who had ever worked with animals understood was something older and simpler than that. It was recognition. It was relief. It was the thing that happens when something that has been told it does not matter is told, without words, that it does. Webb gave the first command. Ghost executed it without hesitation. The training sergeant watching from the edge of the field made a note in his clipboard. The note read, Ghost, full compliance. Elapsed time, 0.4 seconds. Commander Brett Harlan was relieved of his command of the K-9 integration program on the 31st day of the IG investigation. He was reassigned to a logistics coordination role at a naval station in Southern Virginia, a posting that carried no personnel authority and reported to no one whose name appeared in any document he had previously considered important. The reassignment was not publicly announced. In the institutional military, it did not need to be. People understood what a logistics posting in Southern Virginia meant, and the understanding moved through the right channels at the appropriate speed. The Rear Admiral who had received Harlan's falsified reports commissioned an independent review of the K-9 integration program's performance metrics going back 18 months. The review took 6 weeks and was thorough. It confirmed what Ethan had known and what Ghost had been trying to demonstrate. The program's documented failures were not Ghost's failures. They were the failures of a system that had stopped listening to the animal it was supposed to be working with. 4 months after the morning at Pendleton's diner, Ethan Hayes sat on the steps of the training facility at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado on a warm April evening with a cup of coffee going cool in his hand and Ghost beside him. And Ghost was not lying flat beneath anything. He was sitting upright at Ethan's left knee with his ears forward and his eyes moving across the training field in the systematic, deliberate sweep that was simply the way Ghost looked at the world when the world felt worth looking at. The full, slow rotation of attention that Ethan had first read about in Ghost's operational file and had not seen with his own eyes until Marcus Webb came back. Below them on the field, Webb was running Ghost through an off-leash search pattern with a training decoy positioned at the far end of the obstacle course, calling commands in a low voice that carried easily in the still evening air, and Ghost was moving through the course the way he had been built to move, not the reluctant, earthbound flatness of the weeks under Harlan's program, but full speed and fully present, his charcoal coat catching the low amber light, his scar-marked rear leg taking the hard turns without apology or accommodation. The same leg, the same dog. Everything else was different. Ghost completed the final sweep. He located the decoy. He sat and held position without being told to hold it, because he already knew the drill required it, and because the dog who knew the drill was back. He returned to Webb at a run and sat at Webb's left side and looked up. Webb crouched down and put one hand flat against the side of Ghost's neck, the same gesture, Ethan noticed, that Nora Finch had used, and said something too quiet to carry across the field. Ghost's tail moved. Once, then again. Then he turned his head and looked directly up at the steps where Ethan sat, as though he had known all along where Ethan was. Ethan looked out at the Pacific beyond the base perimeter. The water was gray-green in the evening light, the same color as his own eyes, and it moved the way it always moved. Complete, indifferent, ancient, unchanged by anything that happened on the land beside it. He thought about a 63-year-old woman on one knee beside a red vinyl booth who had looked at a broken military working dog and seen precisely what 12 weeks of program administration had managed to overlook, and who had said one word: plain, unhurried, certain, and had meant it so completely that the dog had believed it. The Inquiry Board's final report, filed in the 3rd week of April, contained a section on program protocol recommendations that Ethan had been asked to contribute. He had written 3 paragraphs. The last one read in part that the primary indicator of a military working dog's operational readiness was not drill metrics or evaluation scores, but the nature of the bond between the animal and its assigned handler, and that any administrative decision that severed or disrupted that bond without documented operational justification represented a program failure, not a training failure, and should be treated as such. The recommendation was accepted and incorporated into the program's revised standard operating procedure. He had not mentioned the diner. He had not mentioned Nora Finch. Some things do not belong in official reports. They belong somewhere quieter. Sometimes the most important truth in a room is the one that only the animal has been honest enough to tell. Ghost did not fail those drills. He was asking a question that no one with authority was willing to answer. A question about who he trusted and why it had been taken from him, and whether anyone in that uniform cared enough to find out. God does not only work through decorated officers and formal inquiries. Sometimes he works through a woman on one knee in a diner on a Thursday morning who has spent a lifetime listening to things that cannot speak for themselves, and who says one word with such complete conviction that it reaches a place no command structure could. Loyalty is not a setting you adjust. It is a covenant you either honor or you break. And when it is broken, the bravest thing in the room is often the one sitting very still, waiting for someone to notice. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded today that loyalty cannot be faked and cannot be forced, only earned. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us this: have you ever watched someone in power dismiss what was right in front of them and watched someone else quietly make it right? Your story may be exactly what someone in this community needs to hear tonight. If you believe in stories of service, courage, and the truth that animals have always known before the rest of us, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you the wisdom to listen to what cannot speak, because it has always been telling you something worth hearing.